Before we put on the canvas the laws of the new non-existent world from our heads, let's begin the warm-up of our brain with some already existing worlds. The practice actually came from practices of fiction writing, but this training will help us to begin to see actual stories and the steps of narration, to understand the value and role of each part in the story. Because whatever project you are doing, for yourself or a client, for an animation, game or comics, every story in the beginning has a form of words and sentences. A bit more civilized and modern look than this, but it's some kind of a text. It can be a paragraph length or a book length, very detailed or just a brief description of the idea with main points. Nonetheless, text always appears first. Let's begin with some examples. There are a few of my favorite stories: Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, One Piece and Full Metal Alchemist. Those stories are all very different. They have different genres, some are books or movies, while others are manga and anime. But still, they have one common thing. They are masterpieces of creating a fantasy world. For now, I'll go with Tales through Harry Potter story, as it's known most widely, but in the end, before homework, I'll share notes done for the other stories as well. As I mentioned before, the points we are going to discuss in this lesson are actually writing points. When I studied fiction writing in Wesleyan University, there were long lectures about every step of the plot, but we actually need just a brief information to get used to ideas of storytelling and its morphology. As you noticed, this part of the lesson is called Morphology of the plot. Morphology is usually used in medical slang, but at all it means the study of the forms of things. For example, in medicine, it's partly about muscles of our body, where they are attached and for what purpose they work, which part of the body they move. So I think the word morphology is quite suitable for describing what we are going to do now with the science of storytelling. First, plot. A plot is the biggest unit in narration. The plot is what happened in connected order. By some smart scholars in some smart place, this huge piece was divided into steps, and those steps actually worked, like a color balance or composition for artists. For those who love difficult words and names, those steps are called a Freytag's pyramid. It's not this kind of pyramid, but this one. Exposition, inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution and denouement. A beautiful French word for a final. Now let's go through each step and look what each part is doing in our story. Number 1, in order. Exposition, where everything begins. The initial important background information about the story. For example, in the first book of Harry Potter and Philosopher's Stone, if you haven't read it yet, you are the lucky person to have an opportunity to read it for the first time. In the first book, exposition is the part where Dursley's family describes and the strange appearance and circumstances of a little baby that is coming to live in their house. Also, a brief information of Harry's unhappy life with Dursleys, his features, his strangeness. Now, inciting incident, the event that kicks off the action in the story. This event also usually informs the reader what the main conflict in the plot will be about. In the case of our example book, I'm showing here the screenshots of the movie, but with the first part there is very little difference, so it works either way. Harry learns that he is a wizard, gets a letter from magic school, learns the story about his parents and who is Voldemort. In brief, Hagrid paid a visit to the little boy and turned his life to 180 degrees, and the story got a kick for development. Rise in action, or line of exciting events. It's the main part and the biggest part of stories. Here Harry is going to Hogwarts, studying new classes, getting used to his new wizard life. In this part we get a lot of information about the world, characters, a lot of events and development of characters. Then climax, the part in which the main character pushes up against the wall. Or, in the other words, the part in which we see what our heroes are made of. Harry lost all his popularity, becoming despised even by his classmates. He decides to stay silent and quiet, but after a promenade around the Forbidden Forest, Harry learns that Voldemort wants to use Philosopher's Stone for reviving, and the boy decides to stop him. To do it no matter what the cost. Even if he is risking being expelled from magic school that became his first real home. The characters show what they are made of. Fallen action, the conflict between protagonists and the obstacles that have been put in their way. In our example, Harry, Ron and Hermione decided to go for a little trip to the trapdoor through all trials, fluffy dogs, trolls to save the stone. And then the resolution, the little point for the sake of which all the previous chapters of the book were written for, the place where all the roads of narration lead to. The main character solves the main problem conflict. For now, nice shock, it's Quirrell, not Snape, is the villain. And we finally got the fight between the little schoolboy and the greatest sorcerer of all time. Finally, denouement, or in other words, the end. The remaining secrets, questions and mysteries are revealed in this part, kinda after story. In the first book, Harry wakes up in the hospital wing where he has a long talk with Dumbledore, who explains all the questions. The story is finished with the end-of-the-year feast and celebration. This was the brief structure of the plot development in the book, but in fact it is just the same for any story, written or filmed or animated. The scheme of the narration is pretty simple, but this core holds the long story in a line, leading all the chapters into one direction and point. Each part has a special role that works wholly for its own purpose and the purpose of the main plot. Also, these were the steps of one book. Anyone who has read the story of Harry Potter knows that there are 7 books in this story. Each book itself has this structure, but also if we look at the 7 books as one story, as it is in fact, all 7 will have the same steps. It's how it works for huge stories. In order to keep in line the complicated narration, some line of development always exists in the background. For example, if we take One Piece, it's a story that develops more than 20 years. For the moment I'm writing this course, 2024, the end is not even written, and there are a bit more than 1,000 episodes. This huge story has a core line of development, but also every small story inside it too, like the books of Harry Potter by Joanna Rowling. Every little adventure of Pirate's Crew has steps of exposition, inciting incident, rise in action, climax, fall in action, resolution, and denouement. The resolution is usually kicking someone's ass, and the denouement, strangely enough, is usually a fist too, the same as in the Harry Potter story. So this is the way of morphology of the plot. And yeah, one little thing. Actually, there exists another scheme of the plot, Quixote and Ketsu. As you guessed by the name, it came from Asia. The short description of it is Ki, introduction, Sho, development, Ten, twist. and Ketsu, conclusion. This scheme is very visible in Hayao Miyazaki's animation, and in fact it's kinda how most of anime and manga stories work. The principle of Kishote and Ketsu is very good for long stories, but in reality those two schemes of the plot, Freight Experiment and Kishote and Ketsu, appeared and exist in one world, and people used to mix things. In the end, a lot of Asian stories can be easily described by Freight Experiment, and such stories as Hayao Miyazaki's are rare. At all, if you are also interested in writing a plot and storytelling, I really advise you to watch the YouTube video from those manga editors. They described how the scheme works in a very nice way. But here the course of visual language and understanding the plot is a side quest. Very important one, crucial one, but the information we already got is enough to get the idea how the stories work and what is the purpose of different parts of the narration. But it was all about the plot. Let's talk a bit about the characters themselves.